I've always said that our attitude to COVID policy changes with the second derivative of cases. So when things are on the way up, but they start to rise a little slower, we relax and the policies change. People become already thinking about liberalizing the rules. And when things are on the way down, but they start to slow on the way down, that's when people start getting concerned. And I think we're at that moment. I've been writing some Substacks pieces for a few weeks now, February 10th. March 10th, about what happens when cases go up. I think now we have wastewater data. Now there's some early signals from some cities. People looking at Europe, they're starting to get concerned. And it would be one thing if they took that concern and channeled it in a productive direction, but they're channeling it in all sorts of crazy directions. I just have a few examples today. Number one, I woke up and I saw everyone was once again mad at Emily Oster. I said, I wonder what Emily Oster said. And I read the quote, and her quote was basically that when we ultimately approve a vaccine between 6 months and 4 years old, by the way, we're not there yet because, of course, the trial to date has failed. But when we ultimately go ahead and do it, don't be surprised if not every parent jumps at that, because the risks to a 4-year-old are very different than an 84-year-old. And don't be surprised if there's some people who decide not to do that for their kids, and we don't need to pursue that so vigorously. That's not a high priority item. And I would have thought Emily Oster's quote would be published in the Journal of Obvious Things, but apparently it was published in the Journal of Controversial Things, and everyone kept saying, why is an economist giving me this, I don't know, correct and indisputable advice? I don't know why she's doing it, because she's a logical person thinking clearly. I don't know. Nothing bigger than that, but yet there they were. The next thing I was reading about was the idea that we shouldn't be so concerned about getting a fourth mRNA booster because we've gotten, many flu shots in our lives, haven't we? Haven't we all gotten many flu shots? So another booster is no big deal. Well, of course, there are many differences between a fourth mRNA shot and the flu shot. Number one, the mRNA shot that they're going to be bringing out for the Verback meeting, the fourth shot, it's the same exact sequence as the first one, the second one, and the third one, the ancestral sequence that, by the way, is not the dominating circulating sequence right now. And by the way, I thought the mRNA technology was so good because you could so quickly swap out what's in there. If you could so quickly swap out what's in there, why are we getting this old mRNA vaccine being brought forward for a fourth dose, and Moderna actually has the gall to seek it in 18 and up? But the argument is that if you've gotten a lot of flu shots, you should be able to get this, no biggie. But there are some big differences, and I wrote a Substack post on this. I'll put the link down below. Number one, the adverse event profile is a little bit worse for the COVID shot than the flu shot. Do we really need to get into an argument about that? Can't we just concede? Of course, the adverse events are worse. Of course they're worse. Number two, in contrast with the flu shot, where at least they mix it up every year, you're giving people the exact same thing over and over and over again. And it is really disputed what the additional value will be in a 20-year-old person who's had 3 doses in Omicron. Can we at least agree that we don't know what a fourth dose means for somebody who's 20 years old, healthy, 3 doses in their body, and an Omicron breakthrough infection? We don't know what the fourth dose will do. Number 3, the flu shot mandates. By the way, the flu shot mandates were never as strict as the COVID mandates. They were very porous. A lot of people didn't get flu shots. Many people, millions of people, hundreds of millions of people didn't get flu shots. And people who were subject to mandates, there were a whole bunch of reasons people could get out of those mandates. We didn't fire people en masse, en bloc, in an effort to, appear virtuous in flu seasons. We had some restraint and some, I think, balance. It's just the nature of these things. Number 4. No one reassesses the COVID shots mandates. I think the moment they'll EUA a fourth dose, there are many places that are going to instantly mandate that for their private students or their college or their healthcare facility, even if the data is absolutely uncertain in young people. And they'll do that in a way that's largely indemnified from legal retribution. They don't reassess, even if there's a new variant where the vaccine effectiveness diminishes a lot. The fact that you don't reassess your policies, I think, is a failure to respond to new information. Number 5. The comparison, if anything, should make us think, hey, maybe we'd like to see some more randomized control trials for flu rather than test negative case control design, which has some biases, even if you do it as well as you think you do it. Number 7. We've lowered the regulatory standards for COVID vaccines so low. We use the EUA, and I actually was a big supporter. EUA is the pathway we ought to have used for the first 2 doses. No doubt about that in my mind. In fact, they probably should have looked at the data in October, not November of 2020, and actually halted the trial a little bit sooner. That's another story, but if they had the signal back then, they should have done it as quick as possible. And maybe we should have even thought of, while we were randomizing people and following them, to just continue to accrue and keep randomizing like a stampede-like design with no end in sight. Just keep randomizing people so you get the signal even faster. Okay, so I'm a big proponent that there should be a low regulatory hurdle up front. However, when you get to the third dose in an 18-year-old or the fourth dose, when you get to the age range where the IFR is 1 in 10 to the power of 6 or 10 to the power of 7, when you get to that kind of group, you're really telling me it's an emergency? You're really going to sit there and tell me that we're facing an emergency for a 20-year-old man who's gotten 3 doses and they've had an Omicron probably, perhaps, and they are facing an emergency so much that we have to use the EUA pathway? I think that's preposterous, and I can't believe anyone could say that in good faith. It's not the case. We're not facing an emergency for such a person. Now, we are facing an emergency perhaps for other age groups and demographics, and you may say that vaccinating this 20-year-old is going to confer a benefit to those people, but then you're playing a little game I like to call rampant speculation, because you've never marshaled any data, and I've not seen a shred of data that pursuing with vigor booster programs in adolescents while running a negligent booster program in older people, which is by the way, that's the United States policy response, that's somehow protecting older people. Other nations around the world are sensible. They want older people protected. You know what they do? They vaccinate older people and they boost older people. They don't try looking to expedite a vaccine in 4-year-olds that has failed its primary endpoint. That's not what they do because, they're sensible people. So in short, I would say this comparison between the COVID fourth shot and the flu shot, the bar for the flu shot, if anything, it makes you think that, it's time we beef up the standards across the space rather than lower the standards for the fourth dose in a 20-year-old healthcare worker. And I point out in my article that just because the ancient Greeks used colchicine for gout, and they probably did, and they used colchicine for some other conditions where it probably was indicated, doesn't mean we are never allowed to use any evidence standard higher than what they used in ancient Greece. We can adapt. We can advance. And so those are my thoughts there. The third issue I'm drafting right now, I'll drop this Substack soon. It's really about the fact that, there are only 2 tools in some people's toolbox. Those tools are business restrictions and masking. Those are the only 2 tools in their toolbox. And they see wastewater data, they get concerned. They say, well, I got to find someone to mask around here. How about doing some things that actually have some really rock solid evidence? So why not vaccinate every non-immune person? So don't worry about people with natural immunity. Don't waste your effort. Focus on the non-immune people and vaccinate them with the primary series. How about boosting the elderly, the vulnerable, nursing homes? How about getting our booster rate on par with peer nations rather than in the toilet where it currently is? Instead of reaching out to mask a toddler, how about thinking about expanding your hospital capacity if there was a surge to hit? How about hiring back some people you wrongly fired because they had worked hard during the first COVID surge? They got COVID, recovered, and then for whatever reason, they're a little reluctant to be vaccinated. You fired those people. Don't we want those people working? Aren't we better served by having them work? So anytime we are scared and anxious, we regress and we seek restrictions and these kinds of things and visible symbols that tell us who are the good people and who are the bad people because we crave that. We're human beings. But the right thing to do from a policy perspective is to think broadly about what are the fewest things you can do with the maximum absolute risk reduction across a population. That's just, empiricism 101, evidence-based public health 101, but you don't see that in this world. So, people attack Emily Oster. People compare the fourth shot to the flu shot. People are pushing for these restrictions again, saying we need to get ahead of the curve and get eager with the restrictions. I think this is all sort of emblematic of the wrong policy response, the failed policy response. I'm not for vengeance. I don't believe in vengeance, but I believe in accountability. And you got people who are on the wrong side of the school closure issue. They're on the wrong side of all these issues. They're on the wrong side of running cluster randomized trials. By the way, we're in year 3, and it wouldn't have been nice to have some cluster randomized data for NPIs. Come on, we're in year 3. We got no cluster randomized data. It would have been nice to know if it works, how much, under what circumstances, some interaction coefficients. Would have been nice, but you didn't want to do it because it was a parachute. So you told me. Except I know it's not. So those are my thoughts on where we are in this moment. Cases going up and people getting crazy. So that's where we are. So until next time.